Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Uncensored CMO. Now, one topic I get asked to cover time and time again is B2B. It turns out there are a lot of people out there working B2B that want to know how to do it. And the standard of marketing, let's be honest, is not that good. We need to raise the bar. So I'm catching up with some returning guests, so two very popular B2B experts. In fact, you might describe them as the Peter and Les of B2B, Jon Lombardo and Peter Weinberg. We're here to talk about the myths of B2B and how we can do better marketing, and also to reveal what they did after leaving LinkedIn. You'll find out in this episode. Jon Lombardo and Peter Weinberg, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here, John. Our absolute favorite podcast.
Thank you.
It's the only podcast I listen to.
Now, B2B. You were, for many years, I think, the self-proclaimed Les and Peter.
Hey, only that Les called us that.
All right.
Okay? I mean, yeah, we obviously latched onto it and started calling
you weren't
ourselves
resisting,
that. But yeah, I mean, he said it first, is all I'm saying.
Self-recommending as Les and Peter.
Yeah.
We did need a Les and Peter of B2B. To be fair, the world was waiting for your arrival, I can say. And actually, I've noticed, I mean, in all seriousness, actually, the amount of engagement I've had on B2B episodes on the podcast has been amazing. It's like we're just not talking about it enough. And there's a lot more people in B2B than we realise. And I mean, most people have a B2B element to their jobs as well. I mean, why do you think it is we're just not talking about it? Is it just not sexy enough or what?
It's so weird. Everybody treats B2B like it's just this obscure niche, you know? They told me and John, don't call it the B2B Institute, call it the Institute. It's like a niche. It's half the economy, and it's the bigger half and the faster growing half. So it's really super bizarre. I mean, as for why, I think I don't want to go too deep into the history of the advertising industry, but, you know, we like to talk about the past 100 years was kind of like the B2C century. Like, that's what advertising built, the consumer economy, like washing machines and refrigerators and all these big famous brands like Coca-Cola and McDonald's and Disney. What's starting to happen now, though, is it's these B2B brands are the brands of the future, the fast-growing brands. So I think the past 100 years in marketing has really been all about these big B2C brands who kind of invented modern marketing. But the next 100 years, it's going to be the B2B century. That's our hot take for you,
There
Dr.
we go.
Evans.
Now you've been well known for sort of bringing some evidence to the table in how B2B actually works compared to what people think. Okay, what are some of the biggest revelations you've had since working on B2B and looking at what the data tells us?
I guess the number one revelation would be that most of the things we know to be true about B2C marketing are also true about B2B marketing. I don't think most people would think that, because I mean, one of the things Peter didn't talk about, but B2B is really just all about sales, or it's about product and engineering. It's never about marketing, which is why nobody cares about marketing, which is why people don't talk about marketing, which is why everyone's missing out on this enormous opportunity. I mean, it's bizarre that people don't talk about B2B more, but on the other hand, it's what an enormous opportunity to talk about, to focus on B2B.
Totally.
So that's all that we've done, is say a little bit less interested in the past buyers because we cannot make money from them really. Most of them are dead. But very interested in the future buyers, and the future buyers, they would want to know what really works in B2B. And most of the laws of growth, thank you, Byron, thank you, Jenny, thank you, John and Rachel and Nicole, all the Ehrenberg Bass folks. I mean, most of those laws of growth, with one exception, which we can talk about, they mostly hold true. And so there's an actual playbook around mental and physical availability you can pursue in the world of B2B that will generate growth and will help you grow your team and grow your budget and get promoted and be successful. Okay,
you said except one. So obviously the big debate is B2B really different to B2C, right? We seem to be having that debate all the time. What's the one exception?
Yeah, I mean, I think strategically they are mostly the same. Politically, they're very different. Something we could talk about. The presence of the sales force, makes B2B companies tend to be a bit more short term. But I think when we really went through all these laws of growth, like the law of mental availability, duplicate purchase, double jeopardy, these are these kind of bedrock generalizable principles, and we found they all translated over to B2B. I think the closest we probably found to a thing that really made B2B pretty unique is we call it the unbearable heaviness of B2B buyers. So in any category, you've got this spread between light buyers and heavy buyers. Some people buy the category a lot, some people buy it a little. In a lot of B2C categories, the spread is not that interesting. Like, what's the difference between a heavy and light buyer of toothpaste? Someone buys it twice a year, someone buys it 3 times a year, they spend $10 versus $12. It's not super interesting. There's only so many tubes of toothpaste you can buy in a year. In B2B, it's very different. There's a huge spread. Some customers might be spending $100 on cloud computing solutions. The other might be spending $100 million. So there is just this spread, way bigger spread of how much people actually spend on the category. And you see these heavy buyers are much more valuable in B2B than they are in B2C. Now, I don't think that necessarily means you need to market to them differently, and we can get into that. I think some people then fall into the trap in B2B. We're going to hyper-target only the heaviest buyers, which is a bad idea for a whole variety of reasons. But it is a meaningful difference between the two.
Well, it does make sense, right? Because if you're buying toothpaste, you might buy toothpaste for yourself. You might possibly buy toothpaste for a household of 6 people, but you're not going to buy toothpaste for 60,000 people.
Right.
But if you're working for a B2B company, you might be buying computers for 60,000 people around the world in one transaction.
Right, exactly. There's this Professor Peter Fader of Wharton. We had a long conversation. He's kind of in the expert or inventor of customer lifetime value, and that's kind of his big point here, is that not all customers are equally valuable. And I think, lost in the nuance gets lost sometimes because we talk a lot about penetration and reach, and you just need to reach all customers, and that's true, of course. But in B2B, you really have a big difference in terms of the value of customers, and in theory, you need to be accounting for that.
And one other difference I think we might also have is buying cycle and buying cycle times. Because if you think about, but go back to toothpaste again, you're right, a couple of times a year, fine. But if you're buying, I don't know, a big infrastructure, big system, cloud system, whatever, it might be every 5 years or something like that. So presumably, how can you determine buying cycles and work out how often people buy?
I thought you'd never ask.
To put you on the spot, Jon. Yeah.
I mean, we're going to talk obviously about what we're doing in our new role, our non-LinkedIn role, but AI is able to impersonate specific buyers. We call them impersonas because they're not personas, they're not real people. They're impersonas, they're AI impersonating people. And those people that are impersonas that are impersonating different buyers, you can ask them questions like, how many people are involved in the buying process? How long does the buying process take? How does it differ if you're in a tax role versus an accounting role versus a controller role? I've never seen really good data. And I've looked. I mean, at LinkedIn, we looked a lot. Like, I would assume McKinsey or Bain or BCG, somebody, Deloitte, I don't know, PwC would have had great data on the buying journey and the complexities of the buying journey, the length of the buying journey. I never found great data. Maybe it exists. If it exists, I'd love somebody to send it to me. But you can ask AI that represents the buying committee to take these questions, and then based on the underlying training data, it'll give you answers. And the cool thing is there is no single buying journey. But now with AI, you can estimate for all different industries, for all different seniorities, for all different roles, what the differences in the buying journey are. So I always hate when people say it depends, because it's not a firm answer. But on the other hand, every buying journey in every industry is a little bit different. But you can actually get all of that almost with a click of a button for the first time with these AI buying committees, which I think is a really cool change that is a practical change that's been ushered in, or practical reality that's been ushered in through AI.
Now, we started off by saying, B2B and B2C are not that different, but people are treating them very differently, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So what are some of the biggest implications? What can we learn from B2C? I mean, one obvious one from my point of view is like we become very product obsessed in B2B. We kind of assume that everyone's in the market and therefore we must tell them about the 15 features we've got on our cloud computing system, forgetting that actually building a brand, for example, is just as important in B2B as it is in B2C. And yet we're not putting the skills and effort into doing the kind of hard yards of brand building. I think back to your opportunity, the opportunity for B2B businesses to think about brand building and take those B2C kind of insights is huge, isn't it?
It's the single biggest opportunity. I mean, honestly, if I could distill our 5 years at the B2B Institute working with all these world-leading experts, if I could distill it down to one key finding, it's just that B2B businesses need to invest in brand, and they don't. They invest almost exclusively at the bottom of the funnel, performance marketing, lead generation. Nobody's doing top-of-funnel brand building, and that is the biggest opportunity in B2B because to your point, Jon, and this is kind of true in every category, but it's definitely true in B2B, most people are not in market right now. This is the 95-5 rule, which was our biggest hit of an idea from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. 95% of people not looking to buy cybersecurity solutions right now. So the number one job in the marketing department is always priming those buyers in advance of them buying the category so they think of your brand. And that's what B2B businesses don't do. They focus exclusively on the 5% who need it right now. And that's important. I mean, that's short-term revenue. You go out of business if you're not capturing those customers. But it's just a tiny opportunity. And it's all super competitive because everybody's going after that segment. At the end of the day, I mean, you don't need a PhD to figure this out. Like, you cannot buy a product if you don't know it exists. And there's great research. It was from Bain and Google, actually, showing that basically when B2B buyer enters the category, something like 80% of the time, they choose whatever brand came to mind on day one. So everyone's obsessed with like, oh, the purchase cycle is so long, you know, it takes 2 years, and all that's true. But like the basic decision of what brand you're going to buy, or at least consider, is made on day one. And of course, how do you decide what brands you consider? You can only consider the brands you know, the brands that are mentally available. So that's the biggest opportunity in B2B, is to just make sure people have heard of your brand and they think of it in buying situations. Sounds obvious, but nobody does it.
Can we talk a little bit about the buying situations part of it, though?
We can.
Because brand is
Not
really
your podcast, but
right, exactly. But I
he's
can,
taking over.
But I'm on the podcast, and so
yeah, it's your podcast
exactly.
now.
So as the host of the CMO,
This is turning into uncensored B2B.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
uncensored B2B. Great to hear, everyone. The problem with the brand part of it is that the brand is, people generally understand brand and think about brand and marketing brand through the lens of their products and their services, which are not rooted in the customer need. What I like is the other thing maybe we learned more than anything. So one is invest in brand, but two is how you do it. And here you could probably pull from Ritson saying market orientation, focus on the customer, and Jenny Romaniak's way of really thinking about disaggregating customer needs into buying situations, which is category entry points. And if you think about if you think about a brand as just the number of different situations in which people think of, you know, your brand for reliability, scalability, savings, security, whatever it is, and then so think of brand awareness not as a monolith, but as these individual needs. The higher you rank on all those needs, the higher you rank as a brand. The brand that comes to mind is the brand that gets bought. And so reimagining brand through category entry points, through market orientation, through customer need, and measuring that is so much more, infinitely more valuable, a way to build your brand. That idea does not exist in B2B. That idea is well understood in B2C. You have occasions, you have triggers, you have moments. There's 5-6 different ways of understanding customer needs and marketing to customer needs in B2C. Literally, I don't think that idea existed until a handful of years ago in B2B, primarily because we've talked to all of the smartest B2B marketers. That's not how they conceive of the idea of brand or customer need and then marketing against those situations. So again, just the biggest opportunity to do the simplest thing, which is just work backward from the customer need, market to the customer need.
Yeah,
So-
it's like do brand and do it well, you know? And in
Right.
B2B, everyone's so solution oriented, you know? They're like, this is our product, but it's like, what problem does it solve? And you actually need to market your brand to the problem. You know, it's like people don't buy CRM. They're trying to link the brand to CRM, but people have a particular need. They need to organize their contact information. They need to automate their emails. They need to forecast sales. Any category we looked at, we'd find a category consists of, 30, 35 different buying situations. Different brands were called in different buying situations. So, I mean, the table stakes is just like doing brand at all is a competitive advantage in B2B, but doing it well in this category entry point way, oriented around customer needs, that's like, level 10 brand building in B2B.
And also there's a contrarian opportunity here because no one's doing it well. Not many are doing it well. And we've got the data on this, of course, haven't we? So, we can plan the category entry points and needs and occasions, as you said. We know the importance of brand, but 75% of all B2B ads that we tested together are 1 star.
Yeah, this was,
on
I
the
got to
System 1
give
data,
huge
right?
credit to you, John. This was the least popular research we ever came out with. It basically said 77% of B2B ads are fucking terrible, right? Which a lot of people know intuitively from seeing B2B ads. Which are, yeah, it's true. And that's a big opportunity. Another reason to focus on B2B. In B2C, it's super competitive, There's this famous thing about why redwood trees are so tall, and they're so tall because they have to compete with other redwood trees. So it's like, okay, if you want to create a car insurance brand, now you have to compete with Geico, who has incredible creative. So you need great creative. And sure enough, every car insurance brand pretty much has great creative, right? Liberty Mutual, Progressive, all these brands, right? It's a cost of entry, right? It's a table stakes. In B2B, you can be the only one with good creative. It's like a complete white space to just develop compelling, interesting, entertaining creative. So It's yet another reason
We had,
to focus on B2B.
It's incredibly important whenever you talk about Liberty Mutual
to sing the jingle.
To sing Liberty, 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 Liberty. And jingles will become important again later in this conversation.
They will,
so I'm just
we'll come back to
seeding
just seeding the jingle
jingles.
idea.
Yeah, but how many
Seeding
what is a
jingles.
B2B jingle? You know, there's like none, right? It's
I
crazy.
mean, is there a B2B jingle that's really good? I mean, Intel had the
Intel
is
is probably
Intel Inside.
that's
Intel
they
Inside.
like kind of
the Sonic
invented-
branding.
The Sonic
they
branding.
did
kind
Sonic
of,
branding.
They're the best for that. It's not
Microsoft
jingle,
had
but-
once, "You Stop Me Up," which they,
Really?
Yeah, that was like apparently Mick Jagger told somebody like of the Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer level. They were like, "Hey, we want to license, Start Me Up," and Mick Jagger was like, basically like, "Fuck these guys," and he's like, "Let's quote them some insane number, like $10 million," and they went in and they were like $10 million, and they were like, "Okay."
Yeah, they were like, "We have that in our pocket." Actually, sure, it's like,
Which just goes back to the profitability of
Yeah.
B2B, the opportunity in B2B. All of these things are like the single biggest financial opportunities, B2B marketing. That's where all the growth of the next century is going to be. And there's just no good creative, no good planning,
no brand
Yeah.
building.
no good brand building. Like, I mean, it's just like the entire mental and physical availability playbook could be run there,
Yeah.
isn't being run there. Like, somebody should go do that.
Yeah. Well,
We should go do that.
Yeah.
You should go do that.
We should go do that.
Well, we had Scott Galloway on the podcast last week, and you know what? We
Name
wanted to
drop,
just
great
name drop
name,
there.
very
Great,
good.
great name
Yeah,
to drop,
good,
eh?
good.
Good.
So, do you know what one of his top, lots of advice, by the way, but one of the top bits of advice he gave? If you're starting out now, he said, find the least sexy category possible.
Yes.
He said there is a
100%.
premium. The more sexy the category, the greater the discount there is on how much money you'll earn, because everyone wants to be there, and therefore. So he was talking about
Sports.
Hollywood actors, for example. 87% of the registered actors in the US earn less than $30,000 a year.
Wow.
Now, no one would think that, because all you hear about are the famous actors earning crazy amounts. But he said, find the dullest category you can and innovate in there. Which is the same thing with B2B,
Yeah,
right?
marketing,
The
that's
same
Hold on,
thing.
let me say
It's
something to
kinda
the
like-
audience. Let me say something to the audience. There's no money in B2B. There's no money in B2B. There's
avoid
no
like the
money.
plague.
Avoid
Terrible.
B2B.
You're
There's
gonna
no
hate it.
money in
You're
B2B.
gonna hate
Please don't
You
look
can't
at
make
it.
a
There's
dime.
nothing to see
No,
here.
but it's true.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
if you ask marketers, like let's
Yeah.
say you go to a room full of marketers and you're like, close your eyes, imagine you're a CMO and you get the top job. Like, what brand are you the CMO of? They're all going to
Yeah.
say Guinness, Apple.
Yeah.
They're not-
Hermes. Can I get a
Hermes,
shout out to
sure.
Hermes?
I'm sure.
Future
Hermes
future
is
sponsor
listening.
of the Uncensored CMO podcast.
Future
Shout out
sponsor.
See what he
Hermes.
did there. Yeah.
Nobody thinks of Salesforce, ServiceNow, IBM. So what does that mean? It means there's less competition
Yeah.
for those top CMO jobs, which I'm sure are just as lucrative and interesting as the B2C
I
ones.
mean, those
It's
jobs don't go to marketers; they go to salespeople, which tells you a lot about the industry. I mean, often those jobs go to product marketers who are almost more like engineers, or they go to salespeople, but the marketers don't usually get the CMO jobs in B2B.
Well, because they're thinking you need the technical product information, the understanding of the product more than the understanding of the audience. I think that's often the way.
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest challenges in B2B and why the creative is so shitty. It's the product delusion. It's like, if you went to Coca-Cola, no one at Coca-Cola, I'm going to guess, and I'm going to put words in their mouth, but I'm guessing if you said, why are you so much more successful than Pepsi? They're not crazy enough to believe it's because they have like a totally unique, differentiated product that is nothing like Pepsi, right? It's because they're much better at marketing. They have better mental and physical availability. In B2B, everyone thinks it's just about having a better product and proving that you have a better product by explaining the features and specifications in excruciating detail.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's like, I don't know, 100 years of research at this point about how people actually make decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't need to tell somebody who works at a company called System 1, right? Like, that's not how people make decisions. They rarely buy the best product. They buy the products that they've heard of. They de-risk the decision by choosing familiar brands. No one ever got fired for buying IBM, probably the most famous B2B tagline of all time. So this product mindset in B2B, you've either got the product mindset or the sales mindset. And either way, it's kind of antithetical to the right mindset, which is the marketing mindset,
Ooh.
right?
You know what I love? One of my favorite things when somebody says to you, but I don't need to tell you. And then they go on to tell
Yeah,
you
it's
exactly
good.
what they
Counter-
didn't
Exactly
need
what
to
they
tell
didn't
you.
need to tell
And they
you.
told you they weren't going to tell
So
you.
let me tell you about
Yes.
systems.
Yeah.
System 1,
Yeah,
System 2.
system
Do you know
two,
about
left
that?
brain,
Yeah,
right
no,
brain.
no, Yeah, no, it's good.
Keep going.
It's
You
good.
should
It's
talk to
good.
this guy, Orlando Wood. I think
Yeah.
you would really like him. He's got
Yes.
this whole left brain, right brain
I-
thing.
I'm digging this.
There's
This is
a
great.
good book by Daniel Kahneman. I think
Yeah,
you'd find
yeah.
it interesting. I'll
He-
share
he
it with
knew a
you.
thing or two.
Yeah.
And I know
got
a
the
guy
odd
over at
prize.
System 1 who's hiring. I could put you in touch.
that'd be
maybe,
great,
maybe
actually.
you
I
could
do
get
need
a
a
role
job,
there. Yeah,
actually.
maybe you could get a role there.
You could be very successful there.
Yeah, well, I could see a bright future for you, John. You could have a good podcast someday.
Even
Yeah,
hang on,
now you're on
he's up
John's
now.
Yeah,
Hang on,
exactly.
like-
John's, you're
If
on
this
John's
goes
podcast.
well,
It's incredible.
it's a great interview.
It's gonna
I
be
mean,
big.
yeah.
It's gonna
I'm
be big.
applying for the job. let's going back to dull categories. And you mentioned Geico. I think one of the things I would do if I was inventing a brand in B2B today is, well, quoting Orlando Wood, I'd create a fluent device.
Absolutely.
Like, it is. I think it's one of the underestimated most important things in marketing is having something that's immediately recognizable to you, creates an emotion, creates an association, and can appear everywhere. And we don't see, well, Geico's a good example.
Yeah.
We don't see enough of those, do we, in B2B
But
categories?
We actually did research on this. So
They don't exist.
yeah, I mean, basically, there's great research out there showing probably the biggest source of waste in advertising is poorly branded creative. And, that's why you run System 1 ads to measure fluency. But then we partnered with this company, Distinctive Bet, great company in Ireland, who measured distinctive assets. And we did it across all these B2B categories. So we looked at cloud computing, we looked at
Business
infra-
intelligence,
CRM. We looked at all these big B2B categories. And we looked at hundreds of distinctive assets, right? And ideally, you want to find an asset like the Geico Gecko that 100% of people recognize and 100% of people link to the brand. And in B2B, that like upper right quadrant was a dead zone. There was basically nothing there. Not even the logos of these big B2B companies are famous. Instead, you just see a sea of sameness. I mean, every brand is blue.
Why is that?
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
It's because they don't think about. First of all, I think if people understood a very specific thing about fluent devices, I think a better way to talk about them is, as Jenny talks about them, distinctive brand assets. Assets starts to get you into a financial conversation. Well, now you can plot things on uniqueness and fame, and you can show that you're growing these distinctive brand assets. Another word for a distinctive brand asset is an intangible asset. Companies are mostly valued on the intangible assets that they own. Coming back to Coca-Cola, it's mostly owned on intangible assets brand, right? So you could take this quadrant every year and say, I've grown the intangible assets. You could take that to your CFO, and your CFO would say, this is incredibly valuable work you're doing. This is where marketing directly impacts finance, marketing finance interface. Shout out to Maastricht University, who's doing a lot of very interesting research on marketing finance interface. This idea of marketing and finance, and so that's where creativity becomes distinctive assets, becomes intangible assets, becomes financial. That is something that nobody's really doing, but that's another huge opportunity. I mean, it's a very simple way of explaining to the CFO what you do and why it matters. Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest source of waste. Here's a financial framework for measuring. Let's just go out and do it, and we'll come back and report on it every 3 months, every 6 months. But it's a shame. But it's the number one thing I would do, too, because you have to, how do you build brand across digital and across traditional and big formats and small formats and moving images and still images? How do you tie it all together? How do you string it all together? You have to do it through brand assets, especially in a world that is more and more digital, where literally you may only have a second or two. All you really have is the ability to either build memories or refresh memories. Building probably has to still happen on things like TV, but the refreshing, where you only have a second, an instant, that's probably can only be done with distinctive assets.
Yeah. I've got a really good British example of this, actually, which is Churchill Insurance. Now, they've got this like cuddly British bulldog character that kind of goes, blah, 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 blah. Oh, yes.
Wow, you're really good at that. You should audition for this.
I know, maybe. I could be on a podcast.
You could be on a podcast. This is what we've been saying.
This is a recurring theme. You could be on a podcast, John.
Voiceover for Churchill the dog, So Churchill the dog's been selling insurance for many, many years, and it's almost a national treasure. And you get these little toys in the back of cars that kind of wobble around as you drive and this sort of thing. Anyway, it's well established. But they had as I say recent, 2 or 3 years ago, they had a relaunch campaign. We tested it. The 30-second got 5.0 stars, so very, very impressive. The 5-second was the same score.
Wow,
that's amazing.
And what they managed to do, because the moment Churchill appeared, and he had this kind of like thing going on, everyone was like, I know exactly what it is.
Yes.
So you take all the memory structures and associations and feelings associated with the 30 seconds, Delivered in 5.
Yeah.
5-star, 5 second. That's almost unheard of on our database to get that good a score. But it's all down to the distinctive asset.
There also
All
was
down.
one, now that I think about it, there was a very fun nuance with that distinctiveness research we did, which is the tech brands all scored terribly, but the B2B finance brands, like the banks and insurance companies, actually did have a lot of distinctive assets.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people kind of like shit on the finance companies, like, oh, you need to be as hip and innovative, as cool as the tech companies. Like, when it comes to distinctiveness, it's actually a real liability. Like the fact that the tech companies are so obsessed with being new and refreshing their creative and identity every 5 minutes versus these banks and insurance companies, which like Wells Fargo, they've had that same logo for like 100 years or something like that. So the finance companies stick with their assets for much longer. They're slower to change, which people criticize them for. But the upside is that their assets compound in value over time, and they have some of the most distinctive assets in the category.
Compounding, another financial concept, which is how you build brands over time and how you build brand assets over time. It's good. It's good.
Yeah,
So this is an important point, though. So something should change and something should never change. The things that should change could be thought of as CEPs.
Right.
Sometimes you talk about security, sometimes reliability, sometimes savings, sometimes speed. Those situations could change from creative to creative, from execution to execution. Something should never change. Your bulldog should never change. Your wagon in Wells Fargo should never change. And so if you think about the construct or like the mnemonic of like to be remembered, you need RMB, right? You can't spell remember without RMB. You got to get big reach. The messaging, which is CEPs, that can change. It's got to be rooted in customer, but that can change. But the branding should basically never change. But everybody's dying to change
Constantly.
Like
I
it's
had
the number
this,
one thing. The only constant is change.
I won't name the client because I would hate to shame them on the podcast, but I once visited this client. They showed me this wall in their office, and it was like the 30 taglines they had used over 50 years. And they were like, this is our wall of fame. And I'm like, this is your wall of shame. This is a shame. Like at De Beers, you couldn't have that wall.
No.
It's a diamond is forever. At MasterCard, fantastic marketing organization, B2B and B2C, it's priceless, and they have never moved away from priceless. So it's just, this is partially about incentives. Everybody wants new stuff. Every CMO wants to throw out what the last CMO did. The creative agency wants new creative because that's how they get paid, to develop new creative. But the ability to just stick with the old thing that's working. Yeah.
Well, going back to compounding, we did this test on we took about 100 ads and we retested them over different time periods. So ones that were 1 year old, 2 years, up to 5 years old, ones that had heavy investment, ones that didn't, and so on. And what we found is, in the vast majority of cases, the scores went up. So it turned out basically that the more you see things, the more familiar they become, the more you like them. So actually,
wherein?
Exactly. That's what we concluded.
If there's just like one behavioral science concept every marketer needs to understand, it's the mere exposure effect, which is just basically people like things they've seen before.
Yes.
They like familiar. That's
right.
how marketing works. It's
Yeah.
just like, oh, I'm going to buy Salesforce for my CRM because that's a familiar name and I like it because it's familiar. It's the same thing.
It's loss
with
aversion, isn't it?
creative,
It's
right?
loss aversion.
Yes.
We fear loss more than we.
Well, something that's unfamiliar, it's a red flag. Like if somebody brings you a CRM, if they're like, hey, I'm Jimmy's Discount CRM Shack, you're like, I never heard of that. And then you start to ask yourself, why have I never heard of that? It must not be a very good or successful company. Salesforce, that's a brand I've heard of. They must be doing something right if I've heard of them and everyone else has heard of them. So, we talk about it. Sometimes people talk about rational versus emotional, but I prefer Rory's framing of logic versus psychologic, right? So there's a lot of psychological sense in choosing familiar things, right? It's how you de-risk a decision.
I just generally like where in and where out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a very simple, easy thing to understand. And again, there are different types of marketing have different objectives. Brand building should wear in. It should not change. Performance marketing, fine to change that again because you're trying to get an immediate click. If you don't get the click, switch to the new creative. So that can wear out, but branding doesn't wear out, it wears in. And so understand kind of fit for purpose. There's two types of marketing, two different executions, two different approaches. But most people, again, don't think about that because especially in B2B, it's just all performance marketing. It's all, I fear, wearing out. And of course, that's not the right way to think about it, especially in the world we're talking about, which is consistency over time, compounding over time, asset increases over time. But again, B2B marketers are also, the B2C marketers often run the P&L. So they're very commercial. Like you are a commercial marketer. So you very much understand the commerce side of the business. B2B marketers don't really have that same relationship with finance. They're not meeting with finances regularly. They don't understand the overall, complexion of the business from a commercial perspective. That's a problem. Like, that needs to change. I mean, there's a whole conversation to be had around. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about is this, marketing and finance interface, or marketing to the CFO, but that's an entire there's years of work that need to be done there, and some people are doing that work that everybody in B2B needs to study and learn from.
Yeah, I think I'll do an entire episode on it. I think it's worthy. That's probably the biggest skill, because actually I genuinely believe that the CMO has got a bigger impact on the future prosperity of a business than any other role on the C-suite. In terms of, you're looking at the strategy, you understand the consumer market orientation, you're often spending the biggest discretionary spend in the company, you're shaping culture, huge impact. And the secret, I think, is, basically linking your marketing back to financial outcomes, right? And being able to explain that. And few marketers can explain the return that they're going to deliver for their business.
Also, finance people can't explain it either. I mean, the finance teams are just as guilty of not understanding marketing as the marketing teams are guilty of not understanding finance. I mean, it really needs to come together. A gentleman that we like a lot, I think was on the podcast, Chris Burgrave.
He's coming up.
He is coming on. He's perfect to talk about this topic. But he went and tried to figure out, the finance professors and the marketing professors, do they talk to each other? Have they made this link between finance and marketing? And they don't talk to each other. No. So it's not happening in the academic world. It's not happening in the practical world. Another huge opportunity for somebody is just to have that conversation in a more constructive, kind of applied way.
Now, we're extolling the virtues of consistency and not changing. And obviously, you guys became very well known for your roles in LinkedIn, running the B2B Institute. And then you announced your departure a few months ago, and we've not heard much since. What's going on?
Well, we've been in stealth mode, building our new company, Evidenza. We've been in our underground laboratory building this secret weapon that we think is going to help turn the tide in the war on brand in B2B and B2C. So yeah, we quit abruptly about 4 months ago today.
So Evidenza. This is the name. So are you going to be following your own advice on distinctive assets?
Yes, John, of course.
Absolutely.
If you keep asking questions like that, John, you're never getting back on my podcast ever again. We're already working on
I'm expecting a jingle.
A really tight jingle, which Peter's super excited about. Because, Evidenza. So we're saying we're giving marketers the intelligence they need to go on the offenza with Evidenza. Or if you're in a particularly kind of tenuous situation, maybe you're going on the defenza with Evidenza. So either way, you can sit on a credenza and look at your intelligence from Evidenza.
Yeah, no.
So you're trying to bring some sexy Italian.
We're trying to bring Italian flair to the marketing effectiveness revolution.
To the dull data.
And I'll tell you this, John, it's not going to be blue. The color is not going to be blue.
That's a relief. Can you reveal the color live on air?
I can. We are green and gold. This is actually a very interesting use case of AI, is that AI actually really well understands distinctiveness. In other words, if you go in right now to ChatGPT and you're like, hey, I want to start a CRM company, what colors are infrequently used in the category? It will tell you, hot pink, mustard yellow. It'll give you what other brands don't look like. So it has an understanding of what people look like, don't look like, and that can help you kind of counter
Parmigiano Reggiano off-white.
Off-white, yes, which is our color scheme. No, we're green.
Ragu blood red, it gives you all the Italian flair with the marketing science.
Yes.
It's true. I mean, you just actually revealed why System 1 is hot pink. Actually, that was exactly the insight, is like everything's blue, we're going to be hot pink.
Yeah, and it pops.
It does,
you see that System 1 pink in the feed,
There you go.
There's only a handful of pink brands I can think of. There is
T-Mobile.
There's this cycling company called Rafa. You probably know them.
I know them.
There's Klarna, and then there's System 1.
There is. What a group to be in. I pretty much described my lifestyle. Running out of money, needing to pay for something.
But the colors of our new company, Evidenza, go on the offenza with Evidenza. Green and gold, colors of money. Never hurts to be the colors of money, right? If you're trying to be about marketing and money, which is really what we're trying to be about. So. Beautiful colors, Art Deco colors, gorgeous colors.
So you're teasing us with the brand here. What about the product? What are you actually going to do?
We don't think products matter. Marketing matters, but products don't matter.
It's all about the brand, right?
Products.
This is the point.
Listen, I'll give you the tale. I'll give you the tale of us quitting our jobs, despite my wife being 7 months pregnant, as a reminder. Essentially, I think what we discovered in our last year at LinkedIn is you can tell clients about all these principles of marketing effectiveness, but to really get them to implement it and frankly to buy into it, you have to show them these principles apply based on their own data. So essentially, you have to do market research, right? You've got to go out and survey CRM buyers or cloud computing buyers to understand what do they think of the brand, what category entry points are up for grabs, et cetera. So we're doing a lot of market research. The problem with market research is just that it doesn't scale very well. There's a lot of big problems, but the two biggest ones are just that market research tends to be very expensive, especially in B2B, where you're trying to survey, CIOs, CEOs, people who are not going to take a 60-minute survey for a $100 Applebee's gift card, right? You've got to pay through the nose. Sometimes you can't even pay, right? So it's very it's very expensive. It tends to be very slow as well. Like sometimes it can take 3, 6, 12 months to get market research results back. So we were spending millions of dollars on market research, but we were just finding it didn't scale very well. We couldn't bring it to, 40,000 clients. We could only bring it to like 4 clients. And then we started learning about this very hot new technology called synthetic market research. So in other words, instead of surveying a real human CRM buyer, you can survey the AI impersonating a CRM buyer, an impersona as we call it. And you can ask them the same questions you would have asked in your market research. Are you aware of the brand? What are the buying situations? Which brands come to mind in which situations? Distinctiveness, you name it, any type of market research question. And what we found, we've probably run about 60 head-to-head tests over the past 4 months, is that you get essentially the same answers. We're talking about 90-95% similarity between what the synthetic respondents tell you and what the real human respondents tell you, with the critical difference that it didn't take 6 months, it took 6 minutes, 6 hours, and it didn't cost you $1 million, right? Because you didn't have to bribe 1,000 CEOs to take a survey. So basically, Jon and I, in our final quarter at LinkedIn, started to realize, hey, this is a critical business function, market research, a critical marketing activity that most companies don't do because it's so slow and expensive. And AI is actually going to revolutionize market research, which nobody is really talking about. Everyone's talking about how it's going to change copywriting. Nobody's talking about the other application, which is market research. And we said to ourselves, damn, that could be a really, really big business.
So AI gives you customer on demand. You can model synthetic customers based on the underlying training data in these models. So it comes back to something we talked about earlier. How do you work backwards from the customer? How do you establish market orientation? How do you understand the customer? AI is really incredibly good at that. So we could figure out, you can work at LinkedIn and know why people buy Sales Navigator and then ask AI, why do people buy Sales Navigator? And you can get a really pretty strong match there. 80-90% match. So a core insight like that allows you to then think about, okay, you've just collapsed the time and cost to do something by probably 1,000. That's extraordinary. Bezos, I always think about when we left our job, why did we leave our job? AI is growing so rapidly. What did Bezos say about when he left Amazon? He said, internet was growing 3,400% a year. I've never seen something. He was working at D.E. Shaw, which is one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. He probably would have made $100 billion at the hedge fund. And he said, I'm going to leave my hedge fund job because this thing's growing 3,400% a year. AI is growing that quickly. People have struggled in some ways to figure out what the applications are, but a very simple thing is, figure out category entry points, figure out distinctive assets, figure out segmentation, figure out targeting, right? All these sorts of core marketing jobs that companies today will pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for and wait 3 to 6 months. It can happen. I'm not going to kind of be specific about it, but it can happen 1,000 times faster. Honestly, probably better.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier you've compared it to traditional research methods 60 times to get the 95% overlap. Have you delivered this with a customer in the real world and to see how it plays out?
Yeah, so that's what happened. So we tell customers, hey, we have a synthetic research platform where we can now do qualitative interviews or quantitative surveys against any audience, you name it. And some clients say, amazing, because I couldn't do any market research. Let's do this right now. And then you've got skeptics, and this is true about AI. People are skeptical. So we've had a few clients who've said, if this is what you say it is, that would really be revolutionary. But I find that very hard to believe. So essentially they request a test. And so how the test works is a client will come to us and say, I'm going to give you my survey questionnaire, so the questions I asked, and I'm going to show you the composition of the panel, but I will not give you the answers. Now I want you to provide the synthetic answers. So that's what we do. We take their questionnaire, we send them the synthetic answers, and then you compare them. You compare them in terms of correlation, and we see, 0.9, 0.85 correlation. You compare the mean difference, so like how different are the actual numbers, and sometimes it's like, 2-point difference on a consideration question. But the crucial thing, Jon, is just how similar are the conclusions?
Yeah.
In other words, like, you don't necessarily care the numbers the same. It's, would you have made the same decision? Yeah. And that's where we just find synthetic data crushes it. We see like 95, even 100% of the same conclusions, but reached much faster and in a more
That's really interesting,
way.
isn't it? Because having worked quite a lot with market research people, they tend to exaggerate the small differences,
Yes.
don't they? And miss that the overall picture's the same. It's like, 2% difference in this
People
particular,
obsess over data.
Yeah.
But the point of the data is to make a decision. Is
Yeah.
the decision the same? I mean, the key thing here is you can now make the decision legitimately 1,000 times faster. And it's not a shitty decision, it's a smart decision.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you forecast out, we're not there yet, but if you forecast out 5 years, I can't imagine any wise, intelligent marketing department will be making decisions alone. They'll all be making decisions in combination with a synthetic CMO, some sort of system that is an advisor or a kind of a co-pilot, right? That's just how it's all going to happen.
Back to our compounding point, right? So the compounding benefit of making a decision 1,000 times quicker is huge.
Right. Speed is a competitive advantage.
If you get to the right answer quickly, and the implementation of whatever the decision is, campaign, new product, whatever, is going to be exponential.
Yeah, but I think the fascinating thing is that, so let's say now you can do market research on demand with synthetic respondents. The problem then becomes not getting the answers, but asking the right questions. This is a quote Jon and I love from Picasso. Shout out to Picasso if he's listening to the
Picasso,
podcast.
if you're listening.
He said the problem with computers
Love
is
the
they
blue
can
period.
only give you answers. They don't know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
So really, in the past 5 years at LinkedIn, Jon and I had a front row seat to this effectiveness revolution, where people now know what to ask. Don't ask, are you aware of the brand? Ask, in these 30 situations, which brand comes to mind, right? And now you can use synthetic data to answer those questions. So it's a combination of this effectiveness revolution and an efficiency revolution, where you can now ask the right questions and get answers far more efficiently than you ever could before.
To mention another listener, Einstein, wasn't he the point about, you spend 99% of your time finding the right question.
Yes, exactly.
And then the answer
you spend
appears,
hours
or whatever.
agonizing over
something
right.
like that, isn't
Yes,
it? It's the same kind of point, isn't it? The benefit of asking the right question.
Yeah, and that's going to, eventually we believe all research will be synthetic research. That's what I think will happen in the next 5 to 10 years. At first, it'll be a competitive advantage just to be doing synthetic research at all, because you'll have more customer information in a more efficient way. But very quickly, the flip is going to switch, right? Where it's actually how good are you at asking the right questions? It's not getting the answers quickly. It's asking the right questions.
And there's another thing that often you see in technology. When new technologies premiere, people just use it like the old technology. So radio was talking over, obviously, the radio. Then when TV comes out, it's an image. It's not just a voice, but people are just on the TV like this, talking like it was radio.
Yeah.
So we tend to do kind of like the old thing in the new paradigm. I think we're still doing the old thing in the new paradigm, frankly, trying to replicate a piece of market research around awareness or attitude or something like that. There's a lot of stuff, though, which we're still trying to figure out with clients hand in hand, where they're just new questions you would never ask. There are new audiences you have never surveyed. There are just a whole bunch of different ideas you could probably try to figure out, where it's not something you previously did, but now you can do it. Like people who figure that kind of stuff, like I think everybody will start with the old paradigm and kind of the new technology, but the people who figure that stuff out, they're going to have a huge advantage.
There's some good behavioral science on this as well, though, because the more technical the change, the more familiar and everyday you need to make it feel for it to be adopted.
Yes.
There's a lot of evidence for that. So in a way, you want to sort of exaggerate what you do on the simplest of tasks.
This is like
well, it's also like
Maya.
Right now you save market research for only your biggest decisions, and you'll do like one survey a year. in this future world where synthetic research kind of democratizes access to market research, now you can use it for small decisions, you know, like I'm choosing between these 20 segments for a campaign I want to run tomorrow, which one, you know? It can play in new spaces, smaller scale decisions. You know, sometimes you need answers not in 6 months, but by next week. Market research can't play in that space. Synthetic market research can play in that space. So it really is like an entirely new paradigm. And, you know, we hope to.
I mean, it goes back to the buying situation thing we talked about earlier. Like in one afternoon, I could run for probably 30 different industries with different makeups of buying committees, finance and tech and insurance and construction and manufacturing and whatever biotech. I could probably map 30 different buying journeys. How many people, how long, what are the key complexities? How do you break ties? You know, if you're all, you know, kind of unclear on what to do. You could map those entire categories, those entire industries in a whole afternoon. How long would that take? What would that have cost in the traditional world? It'd have taken a full year, and nobody has really the budget to be able to do that because who would fund it? You know, no company's going to fund it on behalf of everybody. So it's just a simple example where something you couldn't previously do, now you can do it in an afternoon.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, of course, is not just other decisions you could now take in a large organization, but SMEs who haven't had access to the budgets that you might require. So it opens up a much bigger.
It democratizes
audience.
market research for the first time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
It's
the
not just a
economy
luxury
based on
investment.
SMEs.
Well,
huge.
listen, if you go back to Ritson, the centerpiece of every marketing strategy should be the customer, market orientation. All effective marketing flows from an understanding of the customer.
Yeah.
In B2B especially, it's not that easy to understand your customer because it's hard to get a hold of them. You know, these are highly paid professionals, senior people at organizations. Now you could talk to them infinitely. You know, they're infinitely patient, infinitely knowledgeable. You talk to them all day. So it does sort of democratize access to the customer, especially for these small companies that previously they just couldn't afford to do it, you know? So
I actually had a conversation recently with somebody who works in IT service management.
Is it a real person or a
and
synthetic
It's a synthetic person. It's a synthetic person.
You must have to ask this every day.
Every day.
John, is this real or
yeah,
do you ask
is
the
it real or
exactly.
is
the
it
machine?
syn-
Who's
The
answering this?
The lines have blurred.
Is your opinion or?
Where this person was a VP, and I was trying to figure out this other role. Where is it in the organizational chart? And I was like, well, does that person report to you? They're like, no, that person doesn't report to me. That person reports to this person. I'm like, well, how many levels are between you and that person? Like, well, that person, I'm in a very strategic, higher role. They're 2 levels down from me. They're just focused on a more tactical part of IT service management. And it was quite extraordinary that you could actually get at, like I never even thought about, and we don't even really do much on organizational design, but you could probably work through organizational design by talking to enough of these impersonas, which is just, again, like I never even thought of that. That's the kind of thing where,
mapping the buying
how you'd even
committee,
think
which
about
people
that.
have
Yeah,
talked
it's very
about
interesting.
For years.
Yeah, get a job title sorted and all sorts of stuff, isn't it?
That's what we've been doing.
We've
been
got
doing
all that. Yeah, we've got all that,
segmentation.
yeah.
So people say my category is cloud computing. And we'll say, great, here are all the key segments who buy this category. Here's how many people are in each segment. Here's what percentage of sales comes from each segment. Here's what media they consume. And then you can actually talk to them. You can talk to your segment and ask them whatever you like. So again, it's just bringing the customer to the center of your marketing strategy and helping clients build marketing plans with the click of a button powered by synthetic market research.
I mean, segmentation seems to me like hilariously unrigorous, non-rigorous. I mean, I know some people talk about k-means clustering. There's obviously some people who do it in a more sophisticated statistical way, but these, like AI is just a series of statistical models that can produce these sorts of, it's probably done on semantics, not done on kind of the different kind of similarities within the k-means cluster. But that's like segmentation is just something where, again, taking a really long time, getting a result that's not very good. Like that is just something that like should probably entirely be done going forward by, at a minimum, you should start with that. And maybe you then shop that around to a bunch of customers and a bunch of salespeople and a bunch of finance people and you say, help us kind of fine tune this. But I would start with AI for almost any of these things. And then maybe I would have a final layer I'd get from my sales team or my customers. But I would probably flip the process from the way it is today.
So maybe to wrap up then, based on experience, he says, most marketers are making it up. Most marketers are deciding on gut feel, or they're having to go, to use expensive market research. So maybe don't pretend.
Don't pretenza.
Use Evidenza.
Get Evidenza.
There you go.
Yeah, but that's the point.
Stop a pretense. Instead, use a
But you
evidence.
made
Okay, I haven't got the accent for it, but yeah.
These marketers got to go in.
But that's
and
the real
defend
insight
their-
in marketing, surely, is
It
that most
is.
people are making it up.
Yeah, it's not most
And you
marketing
don't have to.
plans.
John,
if you
most
really-
people in life are making
Yeah, it's true. isn't it?
if you probe at these marketing plans and really ask them, how did they decide to go after this segment,
go.
or why did they choose this tagline? Very quickly, you find, to your point, it's just like out of thin air.
9 out of 10 cats were making it up
Yeah,
all along.
exactly. They just made it up, and it's because it's hard to get Evidenza. You know, it's
Exactly.
not easy. Now
Make it
it is
easy.
easy,
Brilliant.
and I think you'll see more evidence-based decisions, more effective marketing, and that is how we will grow the entire global economy. And that's just our small ambition.
Only
And
a
for
small
all of
ambition.
you marketers out there that also want to become more quantitative and rigorous in the work that you do, as we do ourselves, please feel free to reach out so you can go on the offensive with Evidenza.
Go on the offense.
Perfect. Well, Jon and Peter, as always, it's a pleasure to talk, and
Such a
thanks for coming
pleasure.
on and telling us all about it.
Thank you for
Great
having
to see
us.
you, John.
Good to
Thanks
see you,
for appearing on my podcast. It was wonderful.
Uncensored B2B. You heard it here
Uncensored
first.
B2B. Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening or watching Uncensored CMO. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching, hit subscribe there as well. I'd also love to get a review. Reviews make a big difference on other people discovering the show, so please do leave a review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to contact me, you can do. I'm over on X at UncensoredCMO or on LinkedIn, where I'm under my own name, Jon Evans. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.